The fog clung to London that morning like a living grief, wrapping its pale fingers around the gas lamps, swallowing the carriages, muting the city into a hush that felt almost holy. Rachel Haverly drew her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she walked, her shoes wet through, her pride the only thing left intact. Once, she had been a governess in the home of an earl, her voice trusted to guide the daughters of nobility through French verbs and moral verse. Now, her fingers trembled from hunger, and the echo of laughter from that old house followed her like a ghost. She had pawned her last gloves that morning. Her name carried no weight, her references lost to scandal not of her own making but of a master's indiscretion she refused to defend. London, ever merciless, had cast her out. The bells of St. George's struck noon, and Rachel stopped before a bakery window. Behind the glass, sugared buns glistened like treasure. A little boy pressed his face to the pane beside her, eyes wide. His mother tugged him away, sparing Rachel not even a glance. She turned instead to the street, gray with smoke, alive with indifference, and carried on. Each step was a small defiance. She told herself that dignity could still be worn, even when one had nothing left to one's name. At that same hour, a man sat alone in the great dim library of Ashcombe House, surrounded by the quiet thunder of his own disgrace. Arthur Pembroke, Duke of Ashcombe, stared at the sealed letter upon his desk, the coroner's confirmation of his wife's death. Lydia. The word felt strange now, too intimate for a world that never truly knew she had existed. Their marriage, made in haste and secrecy, had been a rebellion against lineage and title, against the cold iron of expectation. Now she lay beneath a nameless stone, and the child she bore gasped for life in a small room at the edge of Whitechapel, unclaimed by law or blood. The Duke pressed his hand over his mouth, trembling not from grief but from shame. To the world, he was a widower without a widow, a sinner wrapped in velvet. His family name, the ancient Pembrokes of Devonshire, would not endure another whisper of scandal. And yet, what was reputation against the cry of a child? He rose, the air heavy with smoke and silence, and called for his carriage. There was no choice left to him but one unthinkable plea. By dusk, the fog had turned to drizzle, the kind that soaked quietly through seams and hearts. Rachel sat on the church steps of St. Bride's, her skirts damp and her resolve thinning. She had walked the length of the Strand in search of work, seamstress, copyist, companion, but every door had closed upon hearing her name. The street lamps began to glow, amber halos trembling through the mist. She pressed her palm to her empty stomach and whispered a prayer for sleep. It was then that a shadow fell across her, a tall man darkly dressed, his hat drawn low. The glow of the nearby lamp caught his profile, high-boned, sharp, weary. His coat was cut with the precision of wealth, but his face carried none of its ease. He spoke her name as though it had been written on his tongue long before this night. "Miss Haverly," he said softly. "You once taught my niece, I believe." She looked up, startled. "Your Grace." The words escaped her before she believed them. She had seen his likeness once in a newspaper engraving, the Duke of Ashcombe, the widower recluse. But the man before her looked nothing like a portrait. He looked undone. He removed his gloves, as if the gesture alone might make the conversation human. "Forgive the intrusion. I would not disturb you were it not." He stopped, searching for words that might hold the weight of desperation without breaking. "Were it not a matter of life and death." Rachel, wary, rose to her feet. "What could you possibly want of me, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice brittle from the cold. He glanced away toward the fog-blurred street where the hooves of his waiting carriage tapped a restless rhythm. "There is an infant," he said finally. "My child. My wife, passed this morning. The midwife refuses to release the babe to me." His jaw tensed. "She demands proof of a mother's claim, fearing prosecution if the birth is deemed unlawful." Rachel's breath caught. "You mean she thinks the child is illegitimate?" "I mean," he said, each syllable cut by pain, "that she will let my son starve before she risks her name upon mine." He turned to her then, and something in his eyes, a kind of broken nobility, unraveled the distance between them. "Miss Haverly, you are respectable, educated, and unknown to the gossip of my circles. You could stand beside me if only for a moment." She frowned, uncomprehending. "Stand beside you? As my wife?" The words trembled in the air. "Just for one day." Rachel took a step back. "That is madness. I could be imprisoned for deception, ruined beyond repair." "You are already ruined," he said quietly, not cruelly, but as a man naming what both already knew. Then more softly, "And so am I." The fog deepened, swallowing the churchyard until the world around them seemed to vanish. For a long moment neither spoke. A single bell tolled somewhere far away, marking the hour with solemn finality. The Duke drew a folded document from his coat pocket, the birth record, and signed. They will release him if a woman bearing my name signs here. That is all I ask. I will pay you more than any governess earns in a lifetime. Rachel stared at the parchment, her pulse quickening. Behind the veil of propriety, her mind leapt to the image of a hungry infant, alone in that cold room. She had seen children starve before, their cries haunted her sleep. Yet to take part in such deceit, before God, before law, was to step beyond redemption. You could choose any woman, she whispered. I do not trust any woman, he answered. Only one who has already lost what society prizes most, its mercy. The rain began to fall in earnest now, darkening the stone beneath their feet. Rachel's shawl clung to her like mourning cloth. The Duke's hat brim dripped steadily, water tracing the line of his cheek. In that moment, they looked less like a nobleman and a governess than two souls at the edge of a world that had forgotten them both. She reached for the document, then stopped. And if we are discovered? She asked. Then let them discover, he said. But my child will live. Something in the way he spoke, neither demand nor plea, broke through her resistance. Perhaps it was the exhaustion of hunger, or the echo of some old dream of decency left in her. She looked up at him through the rain, her voice barely a breath. One day only, she said. The Duke exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. One day, he echoed. Tomorrow before the registrar. After that, you may vanish from my life forever. Rachel nodded once. The world around them blurred into mist. The church bell fell silent. He offered her his gloved hand, not as a master to a servant, but as a man to a woman standing upon the same trembling ground. She hesitated, then placed her cold fingers in his. For a heartbeat, time held still. In the lamplight, he whispered, You may save us both, Miss Haverly. And as the carriage wheels turned toward the dark, Rachel could not tell whether she was being saved, or sealed into the ruin of a lie she could never escape. Dawn bled through the fog in pale ribbons as the carriage rattled toward the parish registrar's office. The streets of London still slept under their shroud of mist, but the horses' hooves beat steady against the cobblestones, as if marking the rhythm of a secret too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Inside, Rachel sat across from the Duke, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. The borrowed gown he had given her, the late Duchess's mourning silk, hung heavy against her frame, smelling faintly of lavender and something older, something gone. The veil concealed her face but not the tremor in her breath. Arthur Pembroke, opposite her, said little. The night had aged him by years. His eyes, gray and resolute, stared through the small window at a city just beginning to wake. The first market cries echoed faintly over the rooftops. The baker's boy crossed himself as the carriage passed. Every detail seemed sharpened by the weight of what they were about to do. When the wheels finally stilled before the registrar's narrow building, modest, sunless, smelling faintly of ink and old paper, Rachel hesitated. The Duke opened the door and turned to her. No one here will question you, he said, voice low. They only need a name and a signature. She looked at him through the veil. And afterward? Afterward, he replied, the world may say what it wishes. My child will live, and you will have your freedom. The floorboards creaked under their steps as they entered. Behind a desk sat a weary clerk, spectacles glinting, a quill poised like a dagger over the open register. His eyes flicked between the Duke's mourning band and the veiled woman beside him. Your Grace, he said with a cautious bow. A sad morning, I presume? Arthur inclined his head. My wife has been ill since confinement. We come only to claim what is ours. The clerk's gaze lingered on Rachel. The Duchess of Ashcombe, he murmured, uncertain. May I have your signature here, madam? Her hand trembled as she took the quill. The parchment before her was nothing but lines and ink, yet it might as well have been a blade. The title, Her Grace, Duchess of Ashcombe, seemed to burn through the page. She thought of the true Duchess, dead in childbirth, and of the infant waiting in that cold room, mouth open, reaching for a mother who would never come. With a breath that felt like a vow, she signed. The clerk sprinkled sand to dry the ink. It is done, he said. The child is lawfully yours. Arthur thanked him, his voice tight, and gestured toward the waiting carriage. But as they stepped outside, a sharp, cutting voice called from the doorway behind. The Duke of Ashcombe's wife alive? God save us, I thought her dead. A woman in a bonnet stood at the threshold, a laundress, her apron gray with soap. She had overheard enough. Before Arthur could speak, she was gone, Her words carried through the street like dry leaves on wind. By the time they reached the midwife's door in Whitechapel, the gossip had already grown teeth. Faces turned. A butcher's boy whispered, "That's her, the Duchess they buried." Rachel could feel the weight of every stare pressing against her veil, every breath thick with curiosity. She walked faster, her borrowed skirts brushing the filthy street, her heart striking hard beneath the lace. Inside the narrow room, the midwife, sharp-eyed, hard-mouthed, waited by a cradle. "So the Duchess walks again," she said. "I feared you'd send another servant." Arthur's reply was cold. "You will release the child now." The woman's gaze swept over Rachel, distrust curdling into envy. "You do not look well, Your Grace," she said. "Death often softens the face, they say." Rachel lowered her head, clutching her shawl tighter. Arthur's voice hardened. "Enough." The midwife relented with a hiss. She lifted the infant, a frail, red-cheeked boy, and placed him into Rachel's arms. For a moment the world stopped moving. The child's small hand grasped the edge of her sleeve. His cry broke through her guarded composure. He was warm, impossibly small, alive. Arthur's shoulders fell, as though the weight of his lineage and his sin both found release in that single sound. Rachel swayed slightly, overcome. She had held children before, but never one who belonged to so much grief. The baby's eyelids fluttered open, blue-gray like his father's, and she whispered without thinking, "You're safe now." Arthur's eyes met hers, and in them she saw not a duke but a man stripped bare of pretense. "Thank you," he said softly. The rain outside had turned steady, drumming on the windows like a pulse. Rachel followed him back to the carriage, the child nestled against her. He slept by the time they reached the Duke's townhouse in Grosvenor Square, a building too grand for comfort, its marble steps gleaming like bones. Servants appeared at once, their shock thinly disguised beneath practiced bows. "The Duchess returns," one whispered to another. Arthur ignored them. "Prepare the nursery," he ordered. "At once." They obeyed, though eyes flickered and whispers trailed in their wake. Rachel, still veiled, followed him through the echoing halls. Portraits of Pembrokes passed, stern men, powdered women, lined the corridor, all watching her trespass. The grandeur pressed upon her, the scent of polish, the hush of wealth, the chill of unearned reverence. In the nursery, a fire had been lit, throwing soft light across the cradle. Rachel laid the child down and lingered by his side. For the first time in years, warmth seeped into her fingers. She looked up to find Arthur watching her from the doorway. "You play the part well," he murmured. She turned sharply. "I did not come for performance, Your Grace. I came for the child." He nodded once, chastened. "Forgive me. Habit, perhaps. My world is nothing but performance." Silence filled the room, fragile and deep. The Duke's voice softened. "You may stay until morning." It would seem unwise for the Duchess to vanish the very day she returned from the grave. Rachel almost laughed, though the sound would have been hollow. "And when I do vanish? Then I shall tell them you went to the country for your health." She studied him through the flicker of firelight. His composure wavered, revealing exhaustion, gentleness, a man too long alone with guilt. "You loved her," she said quietly. He looked toward the cradle. "I thought I did." Rachel said nothing. She only turned back to the sleeping infant, her shadow brushing his small blanket. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm, almost detached. "The world is cruel to women who play roles they did not ask for." Arthur met her eyes. "It is crueler still to those who try to stop playing them." Outside, the rain grew heavier, blurring the view of London's tall windows and endless smoke. In another room, a servant whispered to a maid, "The Duchess is alive." By morning, every parlor in Mayfair would echo with it. Rachel removed her veil before the mirror. Her reflection startled her, half Duchess, half stranger. Beneath the borrowed finery, she was still the woman who had walked through fog and hunger. Yet now, the Duke's child slept under her care, and her name, if only for a day, was the one thing the world dared not scorn. As she blew out the lamp, the fire's last light caught on her signature drying within the register, miles away. A false name immortalized in ink. Down the hall, Arthur stood alone in the dark, listening to the faint breathing of his son. The storm's wind pressed against the windows like the whisper of judgment. He closed his eyes and thought, one day only. But even as he said it to himself, he knew, nothing about this lie would end with dawn. The days that followed unfolded like pages written in secret ink, visible only when the light hit just right. Within the marble walls of Ashcombe House, Rachel's life became a performance she did not rehearse yet could not abandon. She wore borrowed gowns, moved through candlelit halls as if they were borrowed hours, an answer to a title that did not belong to her. The servants, stiff with curiosity, bowed and whispered behind doors. "The Duchess," they murmured, "reborn from the grave." London's rumor mills churned faster than carriages on wet cobblestone. The living Duchess, it seemed, had returned to haunt her own mourning household. Arthur had not meant for her to stay beyond that first night, yet every morning the child's fragile breathing drew her back. The infant, small, delicate, yet stubbornly alive, had begun to know her scent. When he fussed, her voice calmed him. When he refused milk, her touch steadied his pulse. The nursemaids adored her without understanding why. And so, by necessity or perhaps by quiet choice, she remained. One day became 2. Then 3. Each morning she found herself in the nursery's soft hush, sunlight crawling timidly across the floorboards. Sometimes she caught the Duke standing in the doorway, still in his shirt sleeves, half-shadowed by the frame. He rarely spoke, but his gaze lingered too long, not the gaze of a man judging, but of one remembering something he had long forgotten: gentleness. On the 4th morning he joined her by the fire. "You have not once asked for your payment," he said. She did not look up from the cradle. "There are debts that cannot be counted in coin." His brow furrowed. "You speak as though this were charity." "It isn't," she replied softly. "It's mercy." He turned toward the window, rain streaking the glass. "Then you are the first to show me any." That night, Rachel sat alone in the drawing room, staring at the flicker of a dying fire. The house slept, but her thoughts refused to. She wondered what would become of her once her borrowed identity expired. A knock startled her. When she opened the door, Arthur stood there, holding a folded letter. "I owe you the truth," he said, stepping inside. The letter bore the broken seal of a noble family, the Pembrokes of Devonshire. Inside, a cold script declared the dissolution of his inheritance should he persist in claiming his illegitimate son. His marriage to Lydia, the letter read, was without social or ecclesiastical recognition. The child would inherit nothing. Rachel handed the letter back, her expression unreadable. "So that is the war you fight." "Not a war," he murmured. "A siege. And I am losing." She studied him, the fine lines at his eyes, the restless strength in his hands. "Then why fight it?" He looked at her, truly looked, as though her question unsettled him. "Because I could not bury one more soul I love." The silence between them deepened. Firelight traced the edge of her cheek. The air felt suspended, delicate. Rachel wanted to speak, but language failed where compassion began. She only nodded, the motion small but seen. The next morning, a letter arrived addressed to Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashcombe. Rachel's hands shook as she broke the seal. The invitation inside was written in elegant script. "Lady Whitcomb requests the honor of your company at her winter assembly." Arthur found her in the nursery with the letter half hidden beneath the cradle. "You need not attend," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It is enough that the world believes." "But what if they wish to see?" she asked. He hesitated. "Then we shall let them see what they wish to see." By evening the household was in quiet uproar. The Duke ordered his tailor to fit him anew, his carriage polished to mirror sheen. Rachel was given a gown from the late Duchess's wardrobe, white silk trimmed with jet beads, severe in its beauty. When she saw herself in the mirror, she almost laughed. The woman reflected there was not her, yet she envied her, poised, untouchable, wrapped in finery that told lies for her. Before they departed, Arthur approached her at the staircase. He carried himself with the practiced composure of the nobility, but his eyes betrayed something raw. "You need only endure the night," he said. She lifted her chin. "And what will you endure, your grace?" "Every whisper," he said quietly, "and every gaze that mistakes you for my sin." The ballroom at Lady Whitcomb's glowed with 1,000 candles. Music fluttered like silk ribbons through the air. Heads turned as they entered, the Duke of Ashcombe, arm in arm with his ghost. The whispers began at once. "Is it truly her?" "Impossible. They buried her months ago. Look how pale she is. Death suits her, doesn't it?" Rachel moved as Arthur had instructed, slow, steady, unflinching. Yet beneath the calm facade, her heart pounded with the rhythm of judgment. She felt every eye pierce the veil of her disguise, every word bruise the fragile quiet she'd built around herself. Lord Fairfax approached, a man with the charm of a knife and the curiosity of a carrion bird. "Ashcombe," he drawled, bowing just enough to mock. "I see death could not keep your wife long." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Nor decency you," he replied. Fairfax's gaze drifted to Rachel. "Your Grace, may I say, you play resurrection beautifully. It seems scandal becomes the Pembrokes." Rachel held his stare, her voice calm. Scandal requires witnesses willing to stain themselves by watching. Which are you, my lord? Witness or stain? For a heartbeat, silence. Then a ripple of laughter spread through the nearby crowd. Fairfax bowed again, retreating with venom disguised as grace. Arthur exhaled, his fingers flexing at his side. You handled him better than I ever have. She smiled faintly. It takes a ruined woman to see through a ruinous man. Later, as the orchestra shifted to a slower tune, Arthur offered her his hand. A single dance, he said. To complete the illusion. Her hesitation was brief. When she placed her hand in his, something changed. The world fell away, the music, the gazes, the whispers. They moved together in quiet rhythm, his touch steady, hers tentative but true. She could feel the restrained tremor beneath his composure, the burden he carried alone. For that fleeting moment, there was no lie between them, only two souls orbiting the same grief. When the final note faded, applause murmured like distant rain. Arthur led her from the floor, his expression unreadable. You should not look at me like that, he said under his breath. How do I look at you? As though you still believe in forgiveness. Back at Ashcombe House, the night lay heavy with rain. Rachel stood by the nursery window, watching water thread down the glass. The child stirred in his sleep. Behind her, the Duke entered quietly. He said nothing at first. Then, softly, You are not what I expected. Nor you, she answered. He stepped closer, his voice low. You have turned deceit into grace. I don't know whether to thank you, or beg you to stop. Her gaze remained on the window. Then don't thank me, she whispered. And don't stop me either. For a moment, the air between them held the faintest spark, too dangerous to name, too sacred to ignore. When he left, she pressed her palm to the glass, watching the reflection of the cradle flicker in the stormlight. Somewhere beyond the walls, London gossiped about the living Duchess, the scandalous resurrection, the Duke's latest sin. But in that quiet room, Rachel knew the truth. She had crossed the line between protector and participant. As thunder rolled across the city, she turned from the window. The child stirred again and she whispered to him, Your father believes this is all a lie. But one day you'll know the only truth that mattered. The nursery door creaked open. Arthur stood there again, unspoken, uninvited, unreadable. Their eyes met in the half-light. What truth is that? He asked. She hesitated. The candle flame trembled between them. That even in a house built on deceit, she said, love may still be born. The Duke's expression changed, something between fear and longing, and before he could speak, the candle guttered out. The morning after the ball dawned with a gray stillness that seemed to hang between two worlds, one of truth, one of pretense. The newspapers had already done their cruel work. The scandal now had ink and teeth. The resurrected Duchess at Whitcomb's winter assembly, an apparition in silk. The article lay open on Arthur Pembroke's desk, its words coiled like a viper. Beneath the headline was an artist's sketch. Rachel, veiled in white, standing beside him as if caught between life and death. He read it twice, though every line felt like a bruise. The world had always loved a ghost story, especially one that whispered of sin. Outside his study door, servants moved in silence, their deference sharpened by fear. In one night, the lie he'd crafted to save his son had become a public spectacle. Down the hall, Rachel nursed the child by the nursery window, her face pale beneath the morning light. She had not slept. Her hands trembled not from fatigue but from the sound of the world turning against her once more. A footman had left the paper folded on her table. She had read it only once. The artist's rendering of her, hollow-eyed, spectral, felt less like mockery and more like prophecy. When Arthur entered, she did not turn. You knew this would happen, she said softly. Yes, he answered. But I did not think they would be so quick to tear you apart. They haven't torn me, she said, her voice brittle. They have only remembered that I am convenient to ruin. The baby stirred, and she adjusted him gently, the quiet maternal rhythm a defiance of everything cruel beyond those walls. Arthur stepped closer, drawn by that fragile grace. You should not have to bear this, he murmured. It was my deception, not yours. Rachel looked up at him, eyes dark with exhaustion. We both chose the lie, your grace. The difference is you were born forgiven for it. He flinched, not at her words but at the truth within them. That afternoon, visitors began to arrive uninvited, curiosity masked as condolence. Lady Whitcomb herself, her jewels flashing like accusation, came first. She swept into the drawing room where Rachel sat with the child. My dear, she began, her tone syruped with condescension, London is ravenous with your story. I told them, of course, that you were too delicate to attend further engagements. Rachel smiled faintly. How charitable of you, Lady Whitcomb. I imagine the truth must sound more elegant in your retelling. The lady's eyes narrowed. The truth, my dear, is a luxury few can afford. Arthur entered midway through the exchange. His presence silenced the room. Then allow me to pay for it, he said coldly. In coin if not in blood. Lady Whitcomb rose with a flutter of skirts, humiliated but unbowed. The tongue will not forgive deceit, your grace. You have resurrected your wife and in doing so, buried your honor. When she left, the silence she carried behind her was heavier than her words. Arthur turned to Rachel. You see now why I kept to myself all these years. Truth does not save, it only feeds the mob. Rachel met his gaze evenly. And yet, lies starve the soul. For a long while neither spoke. The rain had begun again outside, steady and relentless, as though the heavens themselves refused to look away. The child whimpered in his sleep, breaking the tension. Rachel rose, laying him gently in the cradle, and turned back to Arthur. You cannot live like this forever, she said. Sooner or later they will demand proof, of marriage, of lineage, of loyalty. What will you do then? He looked past her toward the cradle. I will do what I must. For him. Her voice softened. And for yourself? Arthur's expression hardened, the old armor returning. There is no for myself left. Not since the day I buried Lydia. The name hung between them like a ghost returning to claim its place. Rachel stepped closer, her tone quiet but unyielding. You are not the only one who buried something, your grace. Some of us have buried whole lives to protect others' names. He turned sharply, emotion cracking through his restraint. Do you think I do not know what it costs you to stay here? Every hour you spend under this roof, you gamble your reputation against mine. You'll be marked forever as my invention, my sin. Or your salvation, she interrupted, her voice trembling. Have you not yet decided which I am? For the first time his composure broke. The Duke, London's polished spectre of propriety, looked at her with rawness unfit for his station. If I answer that truthfully, he said, I may never let you leave this house again. The words hung in the air, dangerous and tender. Rachel could not move. The firelight drew gold across his jaw, his breath shallow, his eyes burning with the weight of something neither could name. She finally looked away toward the sleeping child. Then it is fortunate that lies come so easily to both of us. That night, she dreamt of laughter echoing through wide marble halls, of a life she had once imagined. A home, a child, a hand that reached for hers without fear of scandal. When she awoke, dawn had not yet touched the horizon, and the world was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Arthur was already awake. He stood by the hearth, still in his nightshirt, reading a letter illuminated by firelight. His expression was unreadable. When he noticed her watching, he spoke without turning. Parliament summons me. There will be an inquiry into the legitimacy of the Ashcombe heir. Rachel sat upright. They mean to take him? They mean to destroy him, he said quietly. And through him me. Then you must tell them the truth, she said. He turned then, eyes shadowed with resolve. The truth will not save him. It will only condemn the woman who stood in his mother's place. She rose, voice firm despite the fear threading through it. Then let them condemn me. I'm not afraid. Arthur stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I am. The admission startled her more than any threat could have. For a moment neither spoke. The candlelight flickered across his face, revealing the cracks in the marble of his restraint. Finally he said, If I fall they will forget me. But they will not forget you. I will not see another innocent buried by my name. She looked at him then, eyes bright with unshed tears. You cannot protect me from the world, your grace. Only from yourself. He smiled faintly, a weary, self-mocking curve of the mouth. And which is the greater danger? Rachel turned toward the cradle, brushing her hand along the baby's cheek. The one that pretends to be love. The words struck deeper than she intended. Arthur stood motionless, as if something vital had been named aloud for the first time. Outside, thunder rolled low across the sky. The house shuddered with its echo. Arthur crossed the room and stopped beside her. Tomorrow, he said, I go before the Lords. If I do not return. You will, she said firmly. You must. He met her gaze, a thousand unspoken things trembling between them. Then promise me this, he whispered. If they strip me of title and name, you will take the child and leave this place behind. He deserves a mother who lives without fear. Her hand clenched at her side. And what of a man who loves without permission? He blinked, once, slow, stunned by her courage. For a breath the world seemed to stop. Rain pressed against the windows like applause from heaven. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but certain. Then we are both doomed to defy it. The clock struck 6. He turned toward the door, coat folded over his arm, and paused at the threshold. The child stirred, sighing faintly in his sleep. Rachel stood motionless, caught between confession and silence. "Arthur," she said suddenly, his name unguarded on her tongue. He froze. But before she could speak again, a knock echoed from the entrance hall below, urgent, insistent, carrying the chill of the storm within it. The messenger's voice carried up the staircase. "Your Grace, by order of Parliament, you are to come at once." Arthur met her eyes one last time, the faintest tremor in his composure. Then he whispered, "Whatever they take from me they will not take you." And as the door closed behind him, Rachel felt the house fall silent, like a body holding its breath before the world's next cruel verdict. The storm had passed, but London awoke beneath a bruised sky, clouds the color of smoke drifting low over the Thames. In the quiet nursery of Ashcombe House, Rachel stood beside the cradle, her hands still, her heart loud. The baby slept, untroubled by the world unraveling around him. Below, the carriages clattered and the city moved on, indifferent, hungry for the next whisper of scandal. The house itself had changed overnight. The servants no longer met her eyes, and the silence carried the weight of waiting. Arthur had not returned. She pressed her hand to the window pane, watching the morning spill pale light over the courtyard. The echo of the messenger's knock still haunted the air. He had gone to stand before the lords, and she had watched him disappear through the fog, coat drawn tight, dignity clinging like armor. She had wanted to call him back, not as a duke but as a man, but her courage had arrived one heartbeat too late. By noon the newspapers were at it again. The Ashcombe inquiry, illegitimacy, lies, and a duchess who never was. The headlines seemed to sneer at her from every corner of the drawing room. She read it once, then tore it to pieces, the sound sharp as breaking glass. The wind through the open window carried the fragments away. The door opened quietly. Mrs. Langley, the housekeeper, stood at the threshold, wringing her hands. "They've sent word, ma'am," she said, using the title carefully as if it might crumble between them. "The Duke, they say the Lords demand proof. Proof of the marriage. Proof of you." Rachel steadied herself. "And if he cannot provide it?" Mrs. Langley hesitated. "Then the child's inheritance is void. They may take the estate. Perhaps even the child." The word struck like a blow. For a moment Rachel could not breathe. Take him? The law can be cruel. She stopped herself, uncertain which name to use. Rachel lifted the infant from his cradle and held him close, her whisper barely audible. "They will not take him. Not while I draw breath." Afternoon darkened into storm again, the sky swollen and restless. Every sound, the roll of wheels outside, the slam of distant doors, set her pulse racing. She paced the nursery until dusk, waiting for the sound of his return. When it finally came, the crunch of carriage wheels on gravel, it was nearly midnight. Arthur entered without ceremony, his face ashen, his coat drenched. For a moment neither spoke. The silence was not emptiness but exhaustion made visible. "They demanded records," he said at last, his voice low. "I could give them none. Lydia and I, we married in secret, without witnesses, without registry. They called it an invention, a fabrication to mask a bastard child." Rachel's throat tightened. "And what of me?" "They demanded to see you," he said. "I told them you were ill, confined, unable to appear." She turned away. A lie to protect a lie. An act to protect the innocent. "Which one?" she asked quietly. "Me, or your son?" He did not answer. Instead, he removed a folded paper from his pocket, a decree stamped with the wax seal of Parliament. "They will summon you tomorrow. They want the Duchess to stand before them." Her eyes met his. "And what will you have me do? Well, deny myself? Pretend one more time that I am what I am not?" Arthur's voice broke through the tension, rough and earnest. "Rachel, if you speak their truth, I lose everything. If you speak mine, you lose yourself." The candlelight flickered, trembling between them. The house creaked as if listening. She looked down at the baby, whose small fist clutched the edge of her gown. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "we should both stop lying." The storm deepened outside, wind lashing against the windows. Arthur's composure cracked, and he crossed the room, taking her hand in both of his. His voice shook not from fear but from something deeper, an unbearable tenderness. "You do not understand," he whispered. I would give up title, land, name, all of it, but they will not stop there. They will come for the child. And if they take him, Rachel, they will destroy him for what he represents. She met his gaze, unflinching. Then let them destroy me instead. He recoiled as if struck. Do not speak so. Why not? She cried, her voice breaking. You and I were both buried long before this began. You under duty, me under shame. But that child, he deserves a life born of truth, not the ashes of your guilt. Arthur turned away, his jaw tight, his breath unsteady. If you testify before them, they will brand you a fraud. They will strip you of everything. Rachel's answer came softly but with iron beneath it. They cannot strip me of what I never owned. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself hesitated to interrupt. Then slowly Arthur faced her. His voice was scarcely more than a whisper. What will you say? The truth, she said. That there was once a woman who died giving birth, and another who lived to love the child she left behind. He closed his eyes, the weight of her words pressing through every inch of him. When he opened them again, she saw a man unmasked, no longer a duke but a soul laid bare. Rachel, he said, if you do this, you end us. She stepped closer, tears glimmering like glass. Then let that be the ending we both deserve. The next morning arrived sharp and colorless, the kind of day London reserved for its cruelest reckonings. The carriage ride to Westminster was silent. Arthur sat beside her, hands clenched on his cane, gaze fixed ahead. Rachel wore no jewels, no veil, only a plain gown of gray silk, modest as truth itself. The child remained at home, asleep in his cradle, guarded by Mrs. Langley's trembling devotion. The courtroom was a cathedral of scrutiny. Lords in powdered wigs watched from their benches, murmuring behind gloved hands. The air reeked of judgment and ink. When her name, Duchess of Ashcombe, was announced, a ripple of whispers spread through the chamber. She walked forward, head high, each step a defiance of every whisper that had once condemned her. Arthur stood before them first, his defense eloquent but hollow. His voice carried the weight of nobility but none of the conviction that had once burned in him. When his words faltered, Rachel rose. My lords, she said, her voice steady though her heart thundered. You asked for proof. I can give you none. I am not the Duchess of Ashcombe. I am no man's wife. But the child you would punish has done no wrong. If deception was committed, it was mine, born not of greed but of mercy. The room fell to silence. Even the scribe stopped writing. Arthur turned to her, eyes wide, not in anger but awe. He took a step forward, ignoring the shouts of protest from the gallery. No, he said, his voice breaking through the silence like light through storm clouds. The lie was mine. I begged her to play the part to save my son. She gave him a mother when I could not give him a future. If there is punishment to be given, let it be mine. The chamber erupted in uproar. Voices shouted, fists struck tables. Rachel met his gaze across the chaos, and in that instant, something passed between them, an understanding so profound it needed no words. By evening the verdict came. The child would remain under Arthur's guardianship, but his title suspended. Rachel would face no charges. Her virtue, as the papers called it, spared by the very grace she had risked everything to defend. Outside the rain had stopped. London glistened in the weak sun like a city reborn. In the courtyard, Rachel waited beside the carriage. When Arthur emerged, she turned to him, not with triumph but peace. So, she said quietly, we have both been stripped clean. He looked at her, the faintest smile breaking through the exhaustion. Then perhaps we may finally begin. Their hands brushed, not a gesture of pretense but of recognition. Above them, the clouds parted, and the first light of afternoon spilled across the wet stone. For the first time, there was no title between them, no lie left to hold. Only the truth, fragile and living. And somewhere behind them, in the nursery window of Ashcombe House, the child woke and began to cry, not with sorrow but with life.